So yeah, I run the Wisconsin Solid Partnership. Funding comes from a variety of sources across the state so that I can do this work statewide, even though I am based, like I said before, in Madison. A little touchy. So we're going to talk about salt, and I get to geek out one slide. I used to be a chemistry teacher, so bear with me. We have our salt here. We're going to talk a lot about it, so I think it's worth having a visual. And I think everyone, even if you failed chemistry or didn't even take it, knows what you're looking at on the right. 2 H's and an O. What is that? Water. Awesome. So yeah, we've got water. So we might be drinking some water. Got some water in here. These water molecules get to move around past one another. But when temperatures drop, when we get to 32, they stick together, right? They bond and they form ice or snow. And if they're stuck together and they're stuck on your sidewalk, right, you got a problem. You don't want slippery surfaces. And so most typically what we do, well, hopefully we're going out there, we're shoveling, we're sweeping, we're working to mechanically remove it, but then we might end up needing to use a chemical. And so the primary de-icer, chemical de-icer that we have is salt, sodium chloride. And salt entices those water molecules to let go of one another. When you're cold, and probably most of the time, you want to be hanging out with your buddies, right? So you need something to attract you, to pull you away. You break apart from your buddy, and then you come and you grab hold of that sodium, see here, or grab hold of the chloride. And they give it a big bear hug, and they don't let go, which means the people doing your winter maintenance have done their job, right? You've melted that ice, you've melted that snow. But in so doing, we've created something new. This is a new substance. It's not water here and salt there. We've got one thing. So what do you have when you mix salt and water? Don't think too hard.
Salt water.
Salt water, right? You have salt water. And that's what we're going to have. So we have salt water forever, moving into our lakes and our streams and also our drinking water, which we'll take a look at all of those. So when we use this material, we want to use it as efficiently as possible. So like I said, well, can I talk about why salt-wise? Why does this matter? What are those practices? A few success stories, and I do questions to kind of get people talking a little bit at the end, but also open to any questions at any point. It's a small group, informal, just shout something out. Happy to tackle it. So why salt-wise? I don't know if any of you have seen kind of salt applications like this around your property, but that salt does a lot of damage, right? And you are probably more attuned to that than the average person, right? So for every little bit of salt we put down, we use it hopefully for that purpose, but it does a lot of other stuff, damaging our doorways, inside that door. It's actually a different building, but it gets tracked across the flooring, needs more cleaning. I mean, maybe that makes my new friend happy, right? She'll put her folks to work for you. We might be damaging, even killing vegetation on your property, your soils. I think that probably that sidewalk was damaged enough it had to be replaced. And then, like I mentioned, what's happening to our water? So these are drinking water wells in your region. And naturally in Wisconsin, our water is really fresh. So these dark purple dots are background. That's what all of our water should be. Less than 10 milligrams per liter of chloride, 0 to 10. And what we're seeing, not just around here, but across the state, I was out in upstate New York earlier this fall, folks from Connecticut, all across the Snowbelt region, we're seeing our water get saltier to the point that some people can't drink their water anymore. The one colleague I talked to in Connecticut said that she has families that are suing the municipality for putting too much salt down on their roads. But sometimes the municipalities are pointing back at them and saying, well, you also have a water softener. That's also salt that's going into your well. So how do we kind of break that apart? But what we're seeing now is salt levels in this region going into the 10s, even the hundreds of milligrams per liter chloride. So I did just grab one particular well here up in New London, right? Mm-hmm. That shows up as kind of that light orange, so somewhere between 100, 250. So this particular well is 110 milligrams per liter now. So like 10 times saltier than what it should be naturally. And this is kind of that graph of what we've seen. That's all the data that the DNR has. So in 99, it was probably around like 40 milligrams per liter. Now we're up to 110. So we think about, the importance of our water for economic development in our region, right? What are we doing? Kind of what trajectory are we on? And then think about our lakes and streams. Again, in Wisconsin, a lot of fresh water. Those resources are really important to quality of life and commerce. And the 0 to 10, well, these black dots are that natural background. And again, we're in the tens, the hundreds, in the winter months, even in the thousands of milligrams per liter. So, Fox Valley definitely pops up here, as well as, Milwaukee area, Madison, see La Crosse. Yeah, so more urbanized areas, it makes sense, right? More people, more pavement, more salt going down. And if you are a little sciencey, like I said, that's me, like to think about what does that really mean? Those are numbers, but in terms of our lakes, lake health, stream health, zooplankton are the first to be impacted. Their populations start to go down once we get to 50 milligrams per liter. And if you like to fish, that means there's less food going up the food chain. And if you like your water to be more clear and on the blue side of the spectrum and less green, you might care about this because zooplankton eat algae. So more salt means fewer zooplankton, more algae. And so scientists like Bill Hintz here do experiments where they have buckets of stream water and they add salt and more salt and they watch those buckets get greener and murkier as the algae takes over. So not so pleasant. I think a lot of people recognize, like Winnebago, a lot of our lakes are pretty green, that nutrients feed the algae, but we're also, by putting salt down, taking away the things to eat them. And then there's direct impacts on fish and amphibians like salamanders, frogs, etc. Salt's a toxin. So yeah, salt has a cost, pretty minimal, about $100 a ton. Not exactly sure what Linda and the folks at Van High are paying this year, but roughly in that $100 a ton. Pretty cheap material. But if we look at all the damage that salt does to our infrastructure, it's like 30 times the cost of the material itself. And then if we were to actually think about all the damage it does to our water and the importance of that, we have to add in another almost $1,000 of damage per ton of salt. So why be salt wise? For all the reasons I just went over, right? It just makes sense to, if you have a really corrosive material, only apply it as needed. Don't overdo it. And just a fun fact, or not so fun, it only takes 1 teaspoon of salt to pollute 5 gallons of water. So even, using 1 teaspoon of salt less means you're protecting 5 gallons of water. But why not be salt wise? Let's be honest. It's, talk about the elephant in the room here. We have liability. And I've had contractors tell me it's not a fear elephant, it's just real liability. And I get it. I've heard that for the last 5 years in this role working on this. And this is tied to obviously human health and safety, but also dollars, right? But I do want to say that there are other ways of addressing winter maintenance besides oversalting. And totally radically different stance in Germany and a lot of European cities, actually. It's illegal to put salt down on a sidewalk. I'll say it again. It's illegal to put salt down on a sidewalk because they say salt is really damaging. And we care about our water and we want people to live here in this city, right? So you can't put that material down. You can shovel, right? You can sweep, mechanical removal. They use abrasives that they can then sweep up again, which is a hassle, right? That's more cleaning. But you're not going to put that down on our water. You can be fined 10 to 20,000 euros. That's not a small fine, right? Now, I don't know that we're going to be doing what Germany is anytime soon, but much closer to home, looking at New Hampshire, they have liability protection for contractors that get certified in best practices, just like your contractors who do any of your landscaping are likely, pesticide certified if they put pesticides down. So the idea is similar thing. We got a material here that has some real impacts. People who apply it should know what they're doing. That's going to protect all of us. And then if they do that and they come to a site and they do their due diligence and they look at the pavement temperatures and they apply, remove material mechanically, apply the correct amount of de-icer, they're protected against a lawsuit, you're protected against a lawsuit. So I don't know if anyone, I know Linda does. Is anyone here aware that we actually had similar legislation proposed in Wisconsin? Okay, so I was able to get a bill out there. I worked with State Senator Andre Jacques, so not too far from here. Some of you are smiling. If you're Green Bay area, you're familiar with him. he's a unique man. He puts a lot of bills out there, which I didn't know at the time. All I knew was I was told I needed to have a Republican state senator because it doesn't really matter if you're a Democrat right now, your voice is not heard at the table, right? So it had to be Republican. And State Senator Jacques sent one of his staffers to an open house we had with the city of De Pere several years ago, back in like 2021 or 2022. And he said, you know, is there anything we can do? I said, yes, actually, would you work with us on this? So we got this bill introduced in 2023. And by the time 2024 came along, we actually got it passed through both the Senate and the Assembly. We were this close. But in the meantime, guess who came and talked to the governor's staff and made many, many loops around the Capitol building? Who was fighting this? Not the cell companies. They're not making that much money. Who's making a lot of money off of liability? The lawyers, right? And they were way more organized. Obviously, I didn't, even connect with you guys. You weren't even aware of this. You would have really benefited from it. So, yeah, I was out there with some practitioners on the private side, also on the public side, talking about the importance of this and just common sense. We shouldn't be over applying this material, but we couldn't really defeat the trial lawyers. So they got the governor to veto this bill. And right now, I don't think we have the momentum that we need to kind of counter them. But that's part of me being here today, to change that. So little video here. We didn't test the audio. I think we'll just try it and we'll see how it goes. If not, we'll move on. Is it okay? So you can see this is from Minnesota. They've done a lot more work around proper salting than the state of Wisconsin has as a whole. But let me see if I can, there we go. But salt-wise, I do get around state and talk to a lot of folks about this. So these are the best practices. I can talk for hours and I have activities and we're gonna keep it shorter here. But I just want you to look at this kind of wheel of best practices. And maybe just by taking a look at this, it might spark an idea of something that could be improved on your property. But I'll just highlight a few of these as we go throughout the day. And these pages refer to the larger of the two documents that I've pasted or shared around. Copy. So the first thing that was mentioned, like plans aren't just copy and paste. So having a plan for your facility or all of your facilities, multiple, what are kind of first priority, second priority, maybe there are areas that, as Mike from Thrivent was sharing post-COVID, there are a lot of empty parking spots out there, right? And so they don't maintain all their parking lots throughout the winter. Some of them might be just like a plow only, and then we can dump extra snow there if needed. Definitely parking decks. You don't want to be putting salt down on those very expensive pieces of infrastructure, right? Noting hazards. Where should snow go? Where should salt go? This is another example of just closing down extra kind of high risk, high liability areas. Noting kind of why we're doing that. This is a photo from Wausau School District. Very unfortunate design here of their parking lot. Obviously drainage the rest of the year, but not so great in the winter months, right? No great place there to put snow. It's all draining back down across the parking lot. And there's actually great resources right now through low salt design. And I'm happy to share that with people kind of looking, you know, when we design the buildings, design the parking lots, the roads, etc. What are we setting ourselves up for a disaster like this? Or can we incorporate a couple key ideas that set us up for much safer winters? Salt storage. If you do have any salt stored on your property, it's good to be aware that the state of Wisconsin, this is our one law that we have on the books for salt right now. It says if you have over 1,000 pounds of bulk road salt, you need to follow these best practices. And there's even like a self-inspection kind of guidance document you can use for that. So personally, you know, from like a science perspective, there's no line underground that protects you if you're like 250 feet from your well versus 300 feet from your well. It's more about groundwater flow anyway than that total distance, but it's still the law. So good thing to make sure that you're following that, and not the best practice on the right, of course. Equipment calibration. So has anybody seen salt like this before, where it's like very evenly distributed? It's not the chicken feed method, right? We might have clumps or piles around, but just way over applied, right? So all equipment that puts salt down needs to be calibrated. Again, I'll go back to that pesticide example, right? Like someone's gonna put a pesticide down, like they're not just going out and choosing like, oh yeah, like just go up and down. Okay, that looks good, right? And they're calculating how many pounds, kind of like per, or you know, fertilizer, like per acre are needed, you know, based on the soil. So similar thing here with our equipment, but again, on the salt side, we tend to not calibrate. It was just kind of like turn it on, right? Or 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, sure, whatever that means. Like, oh, it looks good coming out the back, right? As the snow comes down. So another big piece and why we really need to have equipment calibrated is we don't always want to use the same amount of salt. So salt's effectiveness, salt's melting capacity really varies based off pavement temp, as you see here. So when pavement temps are just below freezing, about 30 degrees, it only takes 1 pound of salt to melt over 46 pounds of ice. That's super efficient, right? And it does it in 5 minutes. It's pretty much like magic. That's Linda's team's dream, right? Like, yes, boom, we came in and melting. Is everyone happy? Of course, right? But as the temperatures drop, so does the melting capacity of salt. We get to a point where 10 degrees, it would only be melting 5 pounds of ice. And it's doing it in multiple hours. It takes multiple hours to do that melting. Well, that's not good. Someone's maybe calling Linda's team back. Where's the salt, guys? We need to see more, like the melting isn't happening, right? And so on the public side, our municipalities, our counties, pretty much stop salting, or they should, at that temperature. Once we get below 15 degrees, we don't want to keep putting sodium chloride down. It's not efficient, it's not effective. It might not even be there by the time melting would happen because of wind or traffic, whether it be foot traffic, wheel traffic, etc. So you want to move to an alternative deicer at that point, something that works at colder temperatures. Or you can just say, we're just going to focus on mechanical removal. We're just going to be plowing and sweeping until that time comes. Or use abrasives for traction, because they don't give you bare pavement, but they do work at all temperatures. So what are some of those alternatives? Well, your cheaper ones are still chloride, so they're still have those environmental concerns. But these cousins of sodium chloride, I call them cousins because they all have that same last name. They're all chlorides. They work at colder temperatures. So is anyone familiar, heard of magnesium chloride, calcium chloride? You might see those on some bagged materials if you buy a treated salt at the hardware store for your home use, personal use. They work at colder temps, which is great. But we don't want to use them all the time because, well, in addition to being more expensive, they're also more damaging to our property and to our infrastructure, especially calcium chloride really, really eats through metal. So when the county highway departments, and I don't remember for sure, do you remember if Outagamie County uses some calcium? I visit too many people, so it's hard to keep track. I want to say they do, but typically it'd be used in like a 95% sodium chloride, just 5% calcium chloride, like a blend into their brine, maybe 90-10 if it's really cold pavement temps. But then that way they can keep melting happening, especially on the interstates, those colder temps. There are non-chloride de-icers. So we can just say, you know what, we don't want all this damage on our property. It's not worth it to us in the end. We're going to use something else. And in fact, that's what airports, the Appleton International Airport, is going to do exclusively, right? Because they value their infrastructure. If you really cared about your property, you wouldn't be putting a chloride down. You wouldn't be putting down something that's super corrosive, right? Let's just be honest. So there are a whole bunch of non-chloride de-icers, like the acetate formate family are the big ones. Entry is one of the popular kind of like brands of non-chloride de-icers. I know Reinders sells a similar product, KF50. It's a potassium formate product. So you can see their effective working temps are in that same zone. So maybe talking to your staff or your contractor about some non-chlorides, especially around like the entryways of buildings or areas where you're seeing a lot of damage, if you want to bring that down. Kind of back to kind of looking at calibration and what we've learned about temperature and the chlorides and their limits. This is actually you're inside the truck right now, a Stevens Point, City of Stevens Point truck plow driver or plow and salter. And you can see up at the top right, they have road temp data right there. So their operators have that available all the time to them. I know Linda and her team have some pavement temperature sensors that are out at some of their facilities so that operators know what the pavement temp is all the time. And they just bring it up on their phone and maybe even set alerts, you know, when it gets below a certain temperature so that they're aware of that. But here we're looking at inside the truck, a little cheat sheet. Okay, so there's the pavement temp, and I think I've got another circle. Here's the cheat sheet. So 30 degrees or 31, they're applying 120 pounds per lane mile. Temperatures start dropping, so their salt rate is going to go up, right? 160, 240, 280. You get below 15, and they're not just using sodium chloride. That's when they're going to mix in some sort of additive into their black brine, so they have that ability to do some melting at the colder temps. So, what are the limitations of rock salt? As we saw before, it loses its effectiveness as our pavement temperatures drop. In addition, rock salt doesn't just melt on its own. It actually needs to interact with water molecules and to make a brine to start that melting process. So probably folks have seen situations like this, and then, you know, eventually what you have these small kernels of extra salt all over your property, right? When the melting is over, because there's no moisture anymore for that salt to continue melting. We often over apply it to get melting to happen at the speeds that we want, because people don't want to wait for hours, right? They put the salt down and you want, you know, bare pavement. And it doesn't stay put. How many people have had that salt dragged in to the buildings? Of course, right? Or it's off in your landscaping that needs to be replaced, repaired. So we're gonna kind of look at rock salt compared to salt brine. Now, if people seen salt brine lines, I'm assuming the county puts them down. So you've seen that, maybe your municipality does. Does anybody have brine used on their property right now? Okay, so I'll go just a little bit into this. Brine is still salt. Mike and I were talking about this earlier. Still salt, right? We're not getting away from salt, but it's salt mixed with water. It's diluted with water. Even though it's diluted, it actually works faster than regular rock salt because it's already in that liquid form. So it's like activated and can start melting immediately, which is what everyone wants to hear, right? We want safety now. And it stays in place a lot better. Like I mentioned with Outagamie, and you saw with Stevens Point, you can mix some additives into brine in those small percentages to give it that extra boost that you need at colder temperatures. And you can use it beforehand. So I have seen people putting rock salt down before the storm. It's really bad practice because a lot of that salt doesn't stay there. We generally really over apply. But by putting just a little bit of brine down before the event, it's like a little bit of oil in your skillet. So if anybody at home, cooks maybe a little Pam cooking spray or olive oil, whatever you use, you put that down and then you cook your food, spatula comes and the food comes off, right? But how many times have you forgotten to put the oil down first? And you put your food in and then you go to scrape it and it doesn't come off, right? And you're scraping and scraping, and maybe you're putting in the sink and you're letting it soak and you're scrubbing it some more. It's a lot more work on the back end to be reactive. This proactive step can drop salt use about 30% on average. And increase the speed of melting. Like I said, brine's that most efficient activated form of salt. So brine is a big part of the solution. Also really doing everything we can to maximize mechanical removal. I grabbed that photo of the guys at the Capitol Square there using the just blowing off the snow. That said, there's still a lot of salt that goes down around the Capitol, and I learned recently that all of these brick pavers here are going to be replaced, and they're going to try to do a better job of some of the stormwater control there. So the total replacement costs that all of you are helping to foot the bill, because this is a state project, $6.4 million. And the DOA did not mention anything about oversalting on that property. They said there's a lot of pedestrian traffic. That's why these bricks have degraded so quickly. And I'm like, we need to have a conversation. But yeah, so looking at ways to do more mechanical removal, brush tools, kind of getting down to pretty much bare pavement sometimes, depending on the snow, without using any de-icers. Documentation. This was mentioned by the lawyer from Minnesota. If we don't document it, it's pretty much like we didn't do it, right? You have to have that documentation. So paper, is definitely an option. There are now a lot of technologies that will do that for you. And so it's up there and it's in the cloud. Obviously you can pull that down and have those records. So when I was in upstate New York, I think it was in September, earlier this fall, I was talking with a contractor from New Hampshire where they have that liability protection. He says 90+% of the time at this point, he just pulls all their records from the event, their pavement temperatures, their site information, the weather, the forecast. He puts his little certificate. He's certified on the top of that, turns over the lawyers. 90+% of the time, that's it. End of conversation. They back away because they realize, okay, you do know your stuff. We can't fight you here. So having that documentation is really key. And then more on your end. So that was kind of these are a lot of the things that the contractors can do or your facilities staff themselves can do. But in terms of property managers, thinking about what's the condition of your pavement surface. Back to that cooking analogy. If you have a really nice like Teflon skillet, right? Sometimes maybe you didn't even need to oil it. Like the spatula comes and it's clean, it's pristine, the food comes off. But that starts to get old, right? And kind of pitted and food gets stuck in there and it's a lot harder to clean. So same thing, when our surfaces kind of degrade, we end up needing to put a lot more salt down. And then that just continues to deteriorate those surfaces even more, right? So you kind of end up in that loop. Drainage issues. Now, if you've got a hazard there, like making sure that gets flagged up to the top of the list so your facility staff don't have to keep fighting against that throughout the entire winter season. So ending here with successes. This is one from Mayo Clinic in Rochester. I use this first because Mayo Clinic, right? I mean, we're talking to the hospitals. If they can do this stuff, we should be able to do this anywhere, right? Like these are kind of our more like vulnerable population. So Mayo Clinic, in this particular webinar, they're talking about a number of practices, but salt brine is one of them. And Nate Queensland was their facilities manager there at the time, talking about just on one event, they saved 10 tons of salt by doing that pre-treatment, that anti-icing before the storm. That's incredible. Overall, they dropped their salt use about 50%, 50% at Mayo Clinic. I've got other examples here. These are Wisconsin examples. These are companies that I've worked with. The Bruce Company down in Madison at the American Family Insurance Company campus. And I pulled this example because this is an insurance company, right? If this didn't make sense, they would not be doing it. If there were any more slips and falls, they would not be following these practices. But their winter maintenance now has salt use that's 39% less salt than a similar winter, 70% less salt than a similar winter. CJ's Lawn and Snow, you can see the big tank they've got in the back there. They dropped their salt use 64%. And that owner told me he could not believe it because he's never had a time and material contract. So any salt they put down, it's money coming out of his pocket, right? So he says he's always tried to be conservative. But by switching over to brine, dropped their salt use by 2/3. And he said, this is the quote from him, the customers that participated in this trial were very happy with the results. They said they don't ever want to go back to rock salt. So what can you look at for your RFPs? So of the documents I passed around, one of them is about kind of putting together a good RFP so that you get industry best practices. As I just mentioned, looking at what are the types of contracts by kind of like that payment type. If you have a time and material, you are incentivizing people to put more material down, right? Because they're getting paid a premium based on the amount of material that's used at your site. So switching to a per event, a per occurrence, or per season shifts that salt use decision onto them. They actually have to think a little bit more about how much material they're putting down because it's coming out of their pocket. That you have the right language and all those best practices in your contract. One thing that's in this, so those documents both came from SIMA, the Snow and Ice Management Association. And one key piece of language is you do not use the term snow removal. Because unless they are literally removing all the snow off your property, they are doing some snow clearing or snow displacement. But there was a lawsuit that was won in court. Somebody sued because of a slip and fall inside the building. But they said this is a winter maintenance issue. They went back in the contract. It said snow removal. They said if you had removed all the snow, there wouldn't be any snow to be tracked into the building, and you wouldn't have a wet floor, and my client wouldn't have fallen. So some of those key words that they can come back to bite you. You want to make sure are not in your contract. Or of course, asking your contractor to participate in the Saltwise program. We have a STAR kind of recognition program for companies that not just get trained, but then also pledge to use best practices, and we get some documentation from them on their salt use each winter. So that is the content from me. I'd invite you to chat with somebody next to you, maybe, say hi to somebody new and think a little bit about, something that was new or interesting. If there are additional questions you have, barriers that you would anticipate with changing anything or support you need, and then happy to kind of share those questions out. But maybe just kind of if everyone wants to chat and share a couple questions and kind of debrief with someone next to you, and then we'll share out in a moment. Does that work? Okay, cool. So have at it for a couple minutes. Bring it back together as a large group, and do people mind kind of sharing out some of the ideas, questions, concerns, like what ideas were bubbling? Yeah.
We have questions about brine. That's liquid being used, but how is that sold, and how is it? I mean, is it coming as a bulk?
Great question. Yeah. So the question about brine. So brine is salt mixed with water. It's diluted down to 23.3% salt with water. So it's not transported because that'd be really heavy, right? So people make it on site or like at their shop, right? Like Outagamie County Highway Department, giant brine maker, right? Municipalities have big brine makers. Locally, I think Vanda, you guys are making your own brine. Fox Valley Brine makes brine and sells it to contractors. So there are like some bigger contractors, like actually I think the American Family with the Bruce Company. Bruce Company wasn't even buying their own brine for a while, even though it's a really big landscaping company. I think they've just started to make their own brine, but some companies want to take that on. Others are like, I don't need the headache of making the brine. I'll just buy the brine from somebody, and keep the rest of my life a lot easier. But some people, yeah, so typically people had used rock salt in Wisconsin. The DOT only purchases and then sells regular rock salt to counties. But rock salt, it's a rock, right? And when it's mined from the earth, there's other rock material in there. It's dirty. And you make salt brine, you don't just make brine, you mix that with water, you get sludge in the bottom of the brine maker, and that's a big hassle. And so our bigger users of brine, so counties for sure, some municipalities, some of these companies that are now making a business, making and selling the brine, have switched over to a solar salt. So it's a clean salt. So when you mix salt and water, it's just salt water, and you don't have all the other contaminants and junk in there to deal with. 23.3%. 23.3. And then you test that either with a hydrometer or refractometer. Yep. And I know locally, there's actually a source of brine from Snap Pickle Company, but theirs is only like 3% salt from the last thing that I heard. And so they're trying to figure out, is there a way they could kind of process that, concentrate it? Because right now they send 2 semi-loads of salt brine a day to Lake Michigan. I mean, I shouldn't say to Lake Michigan. They send it to the Milwaukee Metropolitan Sewage District, which can pull out the organic contaminants, but they can't pull out the salt. And so we have 2 semi-loads of salt a day just from that company being shipped down to Milwaukee, one, and then being dumped into the lake. So, yeah. And I don't mean to point fingers at them. I'm just saying, like, locally, it's like we have these sources, right? Like, how do we better use these resources? Yeah. Thank you.
Okay, quick.
Yeah.
It's 1 pound of salt melted, 49 pounds of ice.
Roughly, yeah.
But now we're making salt brine at 23% solution.
Yeah.
So what are the melting equivalencies per pound versus per gallon or things of that nature? How effective is it? And I assume your prices are up from the brine.
So lots of pieces there. So yeah. So let me kind of try to start at the beginning here. So number one, I would say, to whether you're using regular rock salt or salt brine, is really maximizing that mechanical removal. So we're not trying to melt through a lot of snow or ice, right? We don't want to just, well, ice is tricky, right? Once it's there. So salt brine typically wouldn't be used on ice because it would dilute out too quickly. Right? We say salt brine is like a rock star. It lives fast, but it dies young, right? So rock salt can kind of be like the gas station and continue to power it. And if you need to have more melting, if you have like a big layer of ice. I do have contractors though that are liquids only. And so they have battled even freezing rain events with just salt brine. But it's going to take a lot more labor, and sometimes you may end up putting more salt down, right? So salt brine is an amazing tool to have, but you might have a favorite hammer. I hope you don't go after every problem at home with your hammer, right? So it's knowing, again, your contractor can know kind of which tool, what's the right tool for the job. So by putting salt brine down before the storm, in general, that pre-treatment reduces salt use by 30%. Another way to use the salt brine is to spray salt brine on the rock salt, so it activates it. And when the rock salt goes down, it sticks a lot better, and you don't have that bounce and scatter, right? Definitely on sidewalks would be an area to focus on brine only. Parking lots, perhaps you want a little bit of bounce and scatter, maybe under vehicles, and you don't want to drive up and down every lane, but pre-wetting that rock salt. And then there are, like I said, people that just have liquid only, so they would be doing a de-icing kind of after the event, applying a little bit of brine. But you don't have to necessarily use brine to bring down your salt use. It's just we've been up here for so long without even calibrating. We have no idea. A lot of contractors don't really track well how much salt they put down. They give you an estimate, at the end if you have a time and material contract. But we know on kind of like on the municipal side, you saw Stevens Point, like 120 pounds lane melt, right? 240 maybe on the higher end. the contractor equivalent to that would maybe be like 600. Well, I'd say 600 pounds an acre would be more like maybe 450 pounds a lane mile, but we have contractors at 900, 1200, don't even know. Right. So you can also bring things down by appropriate application of the rock salt. So I think that kind of addresses the application needs. And then was there a second part I didn't address? Just the cost. So I would say, and we were kind of talking about this with Angela on the call, kind of like, what is the equipment people have? If your contractors are only set up right now to put rock salt down, there's a capital investment cost, right? There's training and education to use this material, know how to do that well. So you do have to pay sometimes a little bit more for that. But the idea is then there's a lot less damage to your property that way outweighs kind of maybe a little premium for the salt brine. I have a contractor I'm thinking of right now, Jim Turkin. He's out of the Chicagoland area, and he gave a presentation at the Snow and Ice Management Association Midwest Conference that we had done in Pewaukee earlier this fall. And he said he had a client that routinely had, I'm going to get the number wrong, but it was thousands of dollars. I wanted to say $8,000 of like turf and vegetation repair every spring. And they brought her down to $800. So, and that was just through de-icing, not through plow damage, but just the chemical de-icing.
And we've seen all of the above since we made the investment in being able to provide brine to our service partners. So we're in on our snow displacement plans. See what I did there? We invested in brine system in 2023, which I tested a little. Let me correct me if I'm wrong, but in the last two snow seasons, we've been incorporating it on the majority of our sites. Pre-grinding has been really effective, to your point. We've seen great improvements in specifically in how much less bulk salt we have to use on those sites if when we are pre-grinding pre-event. Yeah, so it's been a great switch for us. It was an investment, so from a cost standpoint, we had to recoup that slightly. But then we're also using less bulk materials. Yeah. So it kind of ended up being a little bit more of a wash, I think, for our snow partners.
Seeing a lot of sustainability.
Yeah. And plus we're also trying to, and we're in the business of growing things, not killing things, right? So we also wanted to limit, because in our snow contracts, majority of them, we do include that we will do the repairs in spring. So we're trying to mitigate that on our end as well. So selfishly, we're trying to do that. But we know beyond the selfish aspect of you don't want to have as many lawn repairs in spring. We also realize that it's actually better, for the grass and the surrounding plant material that may be in your landscaping near the sidewalks, where traditionally, you'd be just doing that chicken seed throwing of rock salt, and where it lands. And there could be next to your perennials or ornamental grasses that we can't tolerate that. So, and one of plant material.
Oh yeah, one of our goals is to provide brine for other people that need it as well. I envision someday that even homeowners with their 5-gallon bucket come and fill it up and bring it home. I just really want to get that brine out there that it can improve our environment. I think it's a wonderful option that we're just not all educated enough to utilize it.
Excellent. Did you
have a snow root or displacement more affected by having the pre-grind things?
Absolutely.
Yes. Okay.
Some question over here.
Yep.
I didn't get to meet everybody in here, but I'm brand new from Florida, and
Welcome.
we're very salt and water. We call it the beach. But we just moved to a house in Kokona, and I didn't know about the systems, and there's a salt tank in my basement. And I found a couple of bags of salt in the garage. And I was like, oh, this is pretty fine salt. And my brother-in-law was like, no, don't pour that rock salt, or don't put that salt into that system and everything. So But I had a question as far as like, for the snow retention, the water, the systems, the sheeting, is that all factored in when you build these parking lots and driving and, road hazards and stuff like that? It's just interesting to me,
Yeah. I mean, I would say that low salt design that I mentioned, Bolton and Menk is the company that's really kind of started that, by saying like historically haven't. And we've had, engineers down in Florida designing the parking lots for folks up here in Wisconsin or the buildings, right? And they aren't thinking about winter. And so we end up making things a lot more challenging for the people who have to do that facilities maintenance. So trying to put that at in the design phase, thinking about
We don't have this point, no, but we
water.
had to displace water down there.
Where in Florida?
What's that?
Where in Florida were you?
Just south of Tampa Bay.
Okay, my mom lived in Naples for many years.
Okay.
So, yeah.
My wife's sister just moved from there. It's
Yeah.
definitely new and interesting.
Mhm.
Thank you all for welcome.
Yeah, and back to the water softener. So actually the Forest Products Lab in Madison, we have a whole webinar on this. They capture all the waste brine from they have giant water softeners, and then that's the brine that they use to do their de-icing. Yeah. But they realize we're dumping all these bags of salt, right? Goes down the drain, goes out to our streams. What if we captured it? Because otherwise we're buying more salt for, like you said, doing your parking lot or your sidewalks.
So to make sure my wife's double.
Yeah. And a broom. There you go. And I love taking just a broom right behind. I shovel and I get, use the film, sweep the rest, and I'm good. But question about the brine percentage. Yeah. So it varies over the course of the recharge or regeneration cycle, but the Forest Products Lab has some good engineers on staff. And so they put conductivity meters in the discharge pipe. And so they divert it right at that peak discharge or peak salinity. And so they capture it right at about 23.3. And that's what they don't have to pre-treat it or post-treat it at all. It's set. Mm-hmm. And there's like I said, a whole webinar just on that. So I was just going to mention a few of the other resources that we have. If you're really like into this and you want to get a quarterly newsletter, I don't send out a lot of emails, but emails talking about the webinars we have or events, success stories across the state. Get a little bit more involved when I do have the next bill coming forward. If you'd like to say, yeah, we want limited liability protection, I want to help make that happen. Learn more about the company recognition program. Winter Salt Week is the biggest week to just send the word out across, I want to say the general public, but I've worked with folks in a number of states. So at this point, we have people from 30 different states that joined in for our last Winter Salt Week earlier this year, and hopefully even more in 2026. And then if there's anybody at your site or in your company that would want to see this presentation that I just gave today, I'm going to be doing that again February 5th hybrid. So it'll be in person in Madison, but people could join in virtually. But the webinars, let me just see if I can pull this up really quickly. So this is Winter Salt Week. Smart salting contracts would, but you guys can't see that right now. Let me try this one more time. I will share a different window. Here we go. So Winter Salt Week is January 26th to the 30th. And this smart salting contracts, I think that's going to be on Wednesday or Thursday. This is Martin Torado. He's the president of IFMA. He actually lives in the Milwaukee area. That's an international Canadian and U.S. Trade organization of winter maintenance contractors. And then Jim Turkin is the owner of that company in Chicagoland, who I said brought those damages down, by 90%. So that would be a great webinar to check out on the Saltwise website. This was our most recent webinar. It's with Aaron Rodman, who's a contractor in West Bend who does brine only on sidewalks, just only liquid, and then pre-treats all their salt. So spraying that salt brine on the rock salt. And he says he dropped his salt use down 50% and his customers didn't even know. So that's a cool webinar to check out, but all of our webinars, they're either on the featured content. You can get to them from that or from just the YouTube. And this is where We've got all of our webinars. They're all archived on our YouTube channel. The one with the USDA Forest Products Lab, one with American Family Insurance, track salt savings, the story with Mayo Clinic. So if you want to dig into any of these resources. And then the last thing I will show you is property managers. So I did put this page together. It has an upcoming event. These are some of those case studies I shared, and these are 2 really great resources from the Snow and Ice Management Association. So they're all on there for you. Yeah, Mike.
Question, I know you're running 20% salt brine. What percent is saturated?
That is full saturation.
Right.
Yep. If you overdo that, then the sodium and chloride find one another and precipitate out a solution. Yeah. We got a science guy. Yeah. Appreciate that.
Quick question,
Cool.
which may be a little manipulative, but if it works, why not? I know Angela was talking about a problem with some of the associates saying it's not safe if my feet aren't crunching on the sidewalk.
Mhm.
Is there anything that could be added to a brine to make it A, more apparent, B, look or feel more like rock salt, or just generally give them something crunchy to walk on to make them feel safe, even if it's not really doing anything?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I guess my stance there would be we really need to have a lot of education so that people understand you don't need to crunch on something. Like whatever is crunchy, you're going to be dragging that around, and someone's got to clean that up. It's going to do some damage, right? But like, how do we shift that? And part of the problem is in Wisconsin, our DOT doesn't own a snowplow, right? So they do not do any communication really, right, about winter maintenance. In other states, there's so much information out there about winter maintenance and how states are doing, why they're using salt brine and why this is really good for you as a driver, as someone who cares about the water, as someone who drinks the water. But we don't have that in Wisconsin. So we kind of have this vacuum. And then we're left as municipalities or companies to try to but there's a reason why this should be different, So I'm also kind of pushing the DOT, but we'll see. They're a big beast. Yeah. Yeah, like sand, it really depends on what part of the state you're in and what's available, what's cheapest. So if you go down to the southwestern Wisconsin, on our roads, they use a lot of limestone chips because that's available.
What if you screw around sand?
Yes. So if you have ice, that's actually what, there are a number of counties that do that in Europe. They'll sometimes have water heated sand, but we don't have a lot of the trucks for that. But spraying the salt brine on the sand, it goes into the ice and it actually melts in there just a little bit, grips in there, and you make sandpaper. If you put regular sand on ice, it bounces around. It's like marbles. And technically, the science research is that reduces your friction even more. It can be even slipperier. Yeah, fun story, I was in northern Minnesota. I worked up there for a year at a facility with a lot of kids and hundreds of kids doing environmental ed. And our facility staff had a week where it was well below zero. The coldest day, -55 below with a wind chill. There was no way salt was going to work, right? But what did they do? They put sand down and they used what looked to me like a blowtorch and got that sand to grip in there. And so even those ramps that were icy, you had some friction and you could get to where you needed to go. Yeah.
Sweep up salt, you showed some pictures where it's just crazy, sweep it up and reuse it.
Yeah. Yep, you can sweep it up and reuse it. The tricky thing is all of those salts are hygroscopic. They draw moisture in. So if you sweep it up and there's moisture in there and then you have it, in a 5-gallon bucket or whatever, you might end up with a brick. And that's a hassle, right? Maybe you could make some brine out of that, but I actually have a few of those at home because I'm a sweeper. I sweep up other people's salt. Yeah. But yeah, if you can sweep it up and then use it, you get another event coming. Yeah, go for that. Yeah, because if you put it down in the landfill, it actually is still going to end up in our water because the landfill leachate doesn't get the salt removed. But yeah, I think Lois is standing up. She's ready to kick me on. So happy to answer more questions, but really appreciate it. Yeah.
Mike, I don't know how soon we have to be out of this room. If you guys still have questions and you still have time, I know.
But if people should be able to go if they want to, and then if people have questions, I'm happy.
Yeah, so
they can
but
network.
in advance, thank you, Allison, for making the trek up from Madison to talk to us, to share this with us. It's very important. And I guess you don't know what you don't know until you find out what you didn't know. And so we appreciate it.
Thank you. And
Thanks